Hello everyone, I'm Chis Wynn and welcome to the ROKER RAPPORT podcast in association with Sunderland Community Soup Kitchen, where we build up to our next League One fixture of the season following last weekend's win over AFC Wimbledon as we take on Wycombe Wanderers at the Stadium of Light on Saturday. So to bring us up to speed with all the latest at Adams Park, we're very pleased to have the company of Phil Catchpole from BBC Three Counties Radio and Ringing the Blues podcast. Hello Phil.
Good afternoon, Chris, or good evening, whenever this is going out. I don't know, but yeah, lovely to see you again.
Yeah, how are you keeping?
Yeah, pretty good. Yeah, we're back in League One, but we're all very happy down here in Bucks.
Good stuff. Well, we'll come on to that returning to League One in a bit. But yeah, a bit about you, Phil, just to kick us off. And I mentioned earlier, obviously you commentate on Wycombe Wanderers on the BBC Three Counties Radio, and you do the podcast as well. But is commentating on Wycombe a job, or has it always been your club?
Well, weirdly, I've been going to Wycombe since they're in the Isthmian League in the late 80s. Because that's where I grew up and it was a local team. And then probably about 7-8 years ago, I fell into commentating on them for a local community station and then moved up to the BBC local station a couple of years after that. It's kind of like it's a job, but it never feels like a job, even when they're losing on a Tuesday night and you're miles away from home. I'm very lucky, very privileged to be able to cover the mighty Blues.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Well, it goes back to the late 80s. I remember on the old, I'm going probably back about 30 years, but on the old Premier Manager, I used to always, was it Premier Manager or something like that? I always start off at Wycombe in the non-league, because you had to start off as non-league, and I used to always start off as Wycombe. So got some good memories of Wycombe Wanderers from back then. But just quickly on the commentary side of things, we speak to Nick Barnes every now and again, who covers games for BBC Radio Newcastle, and he mentioned that it was kind of difficult to commentate in empty grounds last season, and he was kind of really pleased that, like everyone else, the fans were allowed back in. Did you have similar kind of feelings about commentating in empty grounds last season? Was it a bit odd?
Yeah, it was weird. I love Barnesy. He's one of my favourite. Every BBC, every club has got a BBC reporter and commentator, and Barnes is one of my absolute favourites in the Football League. He's a great character, lovely guy, and I love his notes. They're wonderful.
His book's brilliant.
It was really strange because the fans were the soundtrack to the commentaries. A lot of people were watching the images as well on iFollow last season, so they could see what was going on. But from a radio point of view, the fans, they made the atmosphere. They were the heartbeat, the soul of the commentary, because it kind of gave all the colour to what you were describing. And it basically made us have to do a lot more work because we had to make it sound exciting, describe everything and add the atmosphere. The first 2 or 3 games were really interesting because you could hear the benches and you could hear what the referees and the players were saying to each other. But once the novelty of that wore off, I really miss fans massively because it filled in the gaps. Sometimes something could happen and you could let it breathe for a few seconds and let the fans take over, because the noise of the fans would tell everyone what was going on anyway because people could hear it. But I missed it massively, and not just on the commentaries as well. When you get to the game, you see the same people in the same places, getting their teas, their pies, whatever, in the same queues and the programmes, and it was that ritual of match day that was really, it's integral to all of us, isn't it? We all have it. We all know the people who sit near us or that we see on the way to the games, and because that wasn't there, it just didn't feel quite real to me. Massively privileged to have got to all the games, especially Wycombe heading to Wembley as well. So I'm not going to complain about it, but I did find it strange.
Yeah. Well, we'll come on to that Wembley trip, but first, I want to kind of wanted to discuss the last couple of years at Wycombe because, to put it mildly, it's been a bit of a roller coaster. I wanted to kind of start with the takeover of the club by the American businessman Rob Coig. I think I've pronounced that right. Have I pronounced that right?
Yeah, spot on.
Yeah,
spot on.
It was there you go, stabbing the dart there. He did that just before the pandemic hit in February 2020 when he took it over from the Wycombe Wanderers Trust, which is essentially a supporters trust. He bought a 75% stake, which was ratified by 95% of the members voting for it the October before that. But the supporters trust had ran the club since 2012. So from the outside looking in, it must have been a huge leap of faith for the trust to move ahead with that sort of deal.
Absolutely massive, because the reason Wycombe were in such a perilous state financially, because they had someone putting money in, a majority owner. He wanted to build a new stadium. He had a great vision for the town and Wasps Rugby Club and Wycombe Wanderers, and it involved Wycombe basically losing their home and becoming tenants in what would have been a massive stadium on the outskirts of town, and basically to play second fiddle to a rugby team. And the fans made their thoughts known about that. And once that wasn't going to happen, the guy that was putting the money in wasn't interested anymore, and stopped funding it and created the problems. I mean, in all fairness to him, Steve Hayes, he then sort of saw the transition into the ownership of the club back to the fans, and made a donation to the supporters trust as well. But fans were really stung by that, and it meant that if anyone was to come in, they put into the constitution that they would need to have this vote, which made it an incredibly high hurdle for anybody to come in and buy the club. Even if it was someone from the other side of the world, like the Coohigs from New Orleans. But they did it the right way. They came in. I kind of likened it to a bit like getting married. You kind of go out for dinner, you go for drinks, you get to know each other, you meet the family. And then if everything's all right, someone pops a question and someone says yes. And that's pretty much what happened. And I mean, the Coohigs are great because they come over and they're not interested in the boardroom or the politics or the wearing a tie and sort of sitting in the director's box and waving at people. They're in the terrace, they're in the bar, they're in the queue for the T-bar, they're chatting to the fans. And the Wycombe fans really responded to that, which is why they got 95% of the vote and came through. And also they've got, they're not massive, they're not massively rich in terms of what we talk about in football senses here. They're not throwing billions of pounds at Wycombe Wanderers to try and get them in the Premier League. What they saw was a distressed business running the hot tap, unable to pay their bills, unable to really sustainably compete in the Football League. They saw potential there that if they could put a bit of money in to kind of invest in the facilities and whatever, they could make a huge difference and build it as a community club and a community asset. And they said they want to get their money back and they want to make it a business, and they've not been shy about that. But they're not doing it unsustainably. They're not sort of going out and spending millions of pounds on a striker and hoping it's going to kick them into the Championship and beyond. This is a sustainable long-term business plan, and I think that's why Wycombe fans love them so much so far. I mean, obviously, if we lose 7 in a row and we're bottom of the table in February, then they'll be calling for their heads, no doubt. But that hasn't happened yet.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the reasons I ask as a Sunderland fan, we've had our fingers burnt with an American owner in the past. So for me, it kind of to have that leap of faith, especially when you're run by the fans, is a huge call. But I read that the club were around £2 million in debt at the time of the takeover. I mean, did that have a big part to play in the members' vote at that time?
Absolutely, because the money that Wycombe were making as a club on match days was essentially servicing that debt. And because Wycombe are a small club, with historically non-league, so banks weren't able to give them any credit whatsoever. So they basically were living hand to mouth. So they couldn't invest in any infrastructure. They couldn't get into the facilities and build income streams to be able to become a bigger club. And by removing that debt, it just took the pressure off. And we've started an academy system developing players again for the first time since 2013. We've been able to invest in the stadium a bit and sell cold beer and hopefully decent food in a timely manner so people can spend money at Adams Park. Because there was horror stories of fans who would turn up to games who would want to spend money. They would want to buy merchandise. They'd want to buy beer and burgers and pies. And they just couldn't do it because the facilities were so bad and the staffing levels were bad and they didn't have the people to run the club properly. And it was heartbreaking because it just needed someone to come in and just say, look, here's a bit of cash to sort yourself out. Let's make this sustainable. And, in football terms, £2 million, it's a bit like saying, can you lend me a couple of quid so I can buy a beer in football terms? So that's kind of where it was at for Wycombe. And it's nice that we're sustainable again. And it's lovely that we aren't throwing millions around and thinking, isn't this great? And then 2 years down the line, it could all fall apart. It seems like it's a sustainable path. I hope I'm proved right in that.
Well, I mean, yeah, and looking back, I mean, obviously in hindsight, which is a wonderful thing, but looking at the timing, February 2020, when it became official, in terms of what followed with the pandemic, it put the club in a really good position. I mean, obviously nobody knew what was going to come, but there were a lot of clubs on the brink financially, and Wycombe had just gone through that process, and then the new owners had to deal with that.
Yeah, it's crazy, really. I mean, because of the vote system, the Kuhigs were around a long time before the pandemic, but they were kind of giving the club loans, in the lead up to the vote on a sort of a no strings basis, sort of no interest loan. So look, if we don't get the vote, just pay us the money back when the next people come in. So they were around, but when the deal got signed, it was 10 days before the lockdown came in, which is crazy. Wow. But a bit like Barnsley, for you guys, I get to interview the people involved in the club, and I was building up a relationship with the Kuhigs, and I was doing interviews for them. And I remember it was a throwaway comment, I think, from Pete Kuhig, the chairman, Rob's nephew. He just said, look, we're lucky guys. This was like about 6 months before the pandemic. And on paper, you think, well, buying a business, before a country goes into, or a world goes into lockdown, doesn't sound very lucky to me. But then Wycombe got promoted. And I'm not saying that was lucky, because they deserved to get promoted. They were top of the table for the majority of that season, and they got through the playoffs, and they beat a strong Fleetwood, and they beat a strong Oxford at Wembley. But they got up into the Championship, which has essentially made Wycombe a sustainable club and a sustainable business for many years to come, because the money that you get in the Championship, like £8-9 million from TV, they didn't spend any of that, really. They spent a very tiny proportion of that on a couple of players, one of which they've since sold for a big profit, and they invested it in the infrastructure of the club to get the income flows up. So it's been a wonderful bit of luck for them. I'm sure they'll say it's hard work as well. But yeah, it's been a weird time, for anyone to be involved in football, but they've embraced it and they've made the best of it.
Good stuff. But again, looking backwards, which can't often be said of a manager, just looking at Gareth Ainsworth, he's due to celebrate his 9th anniversary of his appointment as manager of Wycombe Wanderers next month, meaning, I was having a look at this, he's only second behind Simon Weaver at Harrogate Town on the list of longest serving managers in the Football League. He's only a month ahead of Sean Dyche, actually, at Burnley, interestingly enough. And I was looking at his first full season back in 2013-14, where he only finished above the relegation zone to drop to the National League on goal difference. So in those early days of Gareth Ainsworth, did he kind of ride his luck a little bit?
Absolutely, and he'd be the first to admit that as well. He was thrown into a club that had no money, no resources. We were paying players £100 a week, signings. He had no staff. He lost his all his fitness, and he was bare bones basically. And he inherited a squad of players that weren't his. He had bad characters in there, but also it was his first time year as a manager, so he didn't know what he was doing. He was learning on the job, and he stayed up. He kept the club up on the final day of the season against all of the odds. People still talk about this day now. I was chatting to someone about this the other day. The day at Torquay was incredible. They stayed up by the width of a crossbar. They beat Torquay 3-0. All Bristol Rovers had to do was beat Mansfield Town, who were dead. They had no interest in the game whatsoever. They turned up without their kit. They got stuck in traffic and everything. They beat Bristol Rovers wearing the Bristol Rovers' third kit from the season before, 1-0, which meant Wycombe overtook them. In injury time, Bristol Rovers hit the crossbar. They did everything but score. Someone was smiling on Wycombe Wanderers that day, and more importantly, someone was smiling at Gareth Ainsworth. And do you know what? He took that opportunity and he spent that summer doing what I don't think many people in football either have the balls to do or even get the chance to do, because Wycombe couldn't fire him because they didn't have the money. So they had no choice. Unless he quit, he was going to be the manager. And he went back and he said, I'm going to change everything I can about what's happened to this season, about me as a manager. And he went and spoke to people in the game, and he had no money to do it. He went on Amazon and bought new training ground equipment like nets and goalposts. Him and his assistant manager decorated the training ground. They got rid of all the bad players at the end of their contracts, and they bought in the players they wanted. They had a much smaller squad. and then the next season they finished in they got to the playoff final and lost to Southend on penalties. An amazing turnaround. And he always said it was the making of him as a manager. But if Wycombe had the money to fire him, they would have done. Make no bones about it. The fans that cheer his name today were the ones that were calling for his head on the final home game of that season when they lost to Bristol Rovers and went into the bottom two. And, they won't mind admitting that either. But what it does show you is that if it's the right person and they need a bit of time, what can be achieved in football. And the stars lined up for Gareth Ainsworth, but he's that sort of guy. He's a very positive man, and all power to him, because, my God, he's taken the most of this opportunity, absolutely. And any Wycombe fan, in their wildest dreams, if you'd have said to them they'd been in the Championship, 10 years after that game, let alone a few seasons, they'd have laughed at you. But he's done a remarkable job at Wycombe Wanderers, and there should be a statue of him outside the ground, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think there's time yet for that. But yeah, I mean, I was looking, and like you said, to bounce straight back after that season and finish fourth, and then he took four seasons to get Wycombe out of League Two. But when Wycombe were promoted to League One, they finished 17th in the first season in 2018-19, only 3 points above the drop. And then in 2019-20, as you mentioned earlier on, suddenly went on this promotion charge to the Championship. I mean, after that season they finished 17th, in terms of expectation, was that completely out of the blue, that, or were Wycombe fans quietly confident in that they could have a season like that?
No, getting into League One, the first season especially, was just about surviving. It was, we still had a League Two / National League budget at that point. So it was just about surviving, staying out of the relegation zone and staying in the division. 17th was a marvellous result, a fantastic result. We celebrated that like we got into the playoffs. So the following season, at the start of that season, the trust money had basically run out. We'd bottomed out. They couldn't pay the wages. We'd got to the summer months. The staff were getting edgy and thinking, are we going to get paid? Is the club going to be here in August? And that's when the Coohigs arrived and gave the bridging loan ahead of the vote and basically restored the playing budget to the one that had kept them up the season before at 17th. So the first pre-season game, Wycombe had 9 players. And the rest of it was on trialists and young people coming in through the door. People like Darius Charles, who've been told they'd have to retire. And he was playing just because he was helping out and he was around the training ground. And then from there, they just went on this amazing run. But it goes back to that game at Torquay. Gareth is a guy that he looks at himself first and his team, and he thinks, what can we do? What can we apply to what we've learned in the last season and get ourselves going? And he finds a way, and he finds a way of doing it, and it's his way. Opposition fans hate it because they think it's anti-football, they think it's long ball, they think it's time wasting. But if you've got no money, if you've got no budget, and you can find a way to do what you can, then absolutely brilliant. And, I'm sure we'll talk about this now. Wycombe have got money in now and a bit of resource. And we're now seeing the other side of Gareth and thinking, right, what can he do with a bit of money? But the bloke's a winner. And that's the bare truth of it, because not many people can do what he's done in the past with absolutely nothing. Your former MD was spending more on knitwear and watches than Wycombe were on wages. Yet they were top of the division for a lot of that season. And he deserves the credit for it. He doesn't get the credit he deserves because he's got long hair and he wears cowboy boots. That's the bare truth. But I think the guy's a genius. Yeah.
Yeah, and obviously, you mentioned it earlier on, during that promotion push, the pandemic hit, decisions had to be made by the Football League. As a Sunderland fan at the time, it felt like it didn't really make a difference to us because we were struggling to keep in touch with the top 6 anyway. And I think we'd won 1 in the 5 games before things were knocked on the head. So it didn't really matter too much to Sunderland at the time, to be honest. But what was the general feeling with Wycombe fans in terms of how that discussion went about, in terms of what happened next? Because in a lot of places, it seemed like there was a specific conversation about that, the fact it was Wycombe. Which might not have went the way it did if it was, an Ipswich or for Sunderland, or if it was Sunderland for that matter. If they were in the same position.
Yeah, absolutely. Football snobbery is rife, basically. Wycombe is still seen as a non-league team by a lot of fans. Like I said to you earlier on, I was going in the Isthmian League in the late 80s, I'm only 42, unbelievably, but that's not a long time in the grand scheme of things when it comes to the history of football. And yeah, there's a lot of football snobbery, but the table doesn't lie. And PPG, not ideal. And I love Gareth Ainsworth's response to it, because he was gutted, because he said, look, we've got Fred Onyedinma coming back from injury. We're ticking again. We've had a sticky start to the year, but we're finding form. He was gutted because he thought he could get in the top two by his own right. And, they weren't far off. It wasn't inconceivable. But because you've got people like Darren McAntony and Ipswich and other clubs who throw money around as if it's their divine right to be in the top two, they may well have been. I'm not saying they wouldn't have been, but, the Football League had to do something. The EFL had to do something. And points per game, possibly the fairest way of doing it. I mean, what other way could they have done it? And Wycombe, because they were, they had that game in hand, and it was against Coventry, who we haven't really beaten since time began, and people were going through the history books and throwing all sorts of mud around. But, I think you're right. Had it been another team, I don't know. I mean, had it been Peterborough, then I'm sure Wycombe fans would have been going absolutely crazy and whatever. But that's just the tribal nature of football. Wycombe had a bit of luck, maybe. Who knows? They still had to get through the playoffs, and they did with fairly good style, I thought. But there we are.
Yeah. Like I said, I don't think Sunderland fans really cared too much, because I think we would have crashed and burned regardless. So it didn't really make a difference to us. But I mean, like you said earlier, there was still a semi-final with Fleetwood Town to negotiate. Then you had the playoff final against Oxford, which Wycombe obviously won. And I mean, Joe Jacobson's knees must have been kind of knocking together before putting that penalty away. I mean, that must have been. I mean, for yourself being there and everyone else at home, I mean, that must have been a huge moment. A deep breath.
Absolutely. It's the biggest moment in the club's history, without a shadow of a doubt, because, like I said, that promotion has basically kept Wycombe alive for the next 4 or 5 years, and it's paved the way to where they are now. But, Joe Jacobson, there's not a single person in the world that any Wycombe fan would have wanted to take that penalty other than Joe Jacobson in that circumstance. Everyone knew he was going to score. And that was it. And he's been at Wycombe for a long time. It's his 8th year at Wycombe now, and I'd have put my house on him.
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of, you were there, but the fans weren't there. How much did that take away from the moment for the club? That it was their first time going up to the second tier, but it was in an empty Wembley, and the fans missed out on that.
Absolutely heartbreaking. Like I said, the biggest day in the club's history. 133 years as it was then, and the fans weren't there. Heartbreaking, doesn't really kind of do it justice, to be honest. But it also shone a light on one of the key secrets to why Wycombe achieved what they did. Because if you're watching on TV, I've watched it back, I've watched the Sky full replay, you could hear people there. You could hear the Wycombe bench. There were players who hadn't played for months, who weren't in the squad. They weren't getting in the first team. But they were there making noise because they were allowed in. They had people, like the directors, the Coohigs and stuff. They were banging the drums. They were out there. It sounded like there were fans there. And you look at the Oxford United bench, their subs weren't making any noise. They weren't doing anything. The entire club was pulling together that day. Everyone who could get into that stadium was making as much noise as they possibly could for that team. And in an empty stadium, that actually has quite a big impact, because it echoes around. And that was a Gareth Ainsworth strategy. Again, it was like, look, we haven't got the fans here, but we've got you lot. We've got the players who aren't in the squad. We've got the bench, and we've got the people we've been able to sneak in on sponsor tickets and director tickets and whatever, and they will make our noise for us. And I've seen other teams since then have started doing that as well. But I think Gareth made a video for the team talk before the game, and it was made up of people basically from the club. It was the kids of a guy who died of a heart attack earlier in the season, saying how important it was for them, for the memory of their dad, how much their dad would have loved to have been there, to win that game at Wembley. They took on a new cleaner at the training ground when COVID came in, and they had to put the new cleaning regulations in. She wasn't a football fan. She'd been around the training ground for a month, and she'd grown to love the players and the staff like they were her own kids. And her words were the final words that the players heard when they went out onto the pitch at Wembley, because she said, look, I don't know nothing about football, but I love you guys and I want you guys to do really well. Do it for me and do it for your fans. And it was things like that. And you think afterwards, well, what are the other teams doing that? What are other people thinking about that? And it's again, it comes back to Gareth Ainsworth and that common touch and that thing where that doesn't cost any money, but it means the world, and it means the world to the fans, and it clearly connected to the players, and it built this amazing spirit that has got them into that position. And you can only stand back and admire that and think, do you know what? Fair play to you guys, because no one in the world of football thought you were going to do this, and you've done it, and this is how you've done it. And afterwards, when you told everybody, it just means that much more.
Yeah, sounds like the ultimate team talk. That, I mean, not sure you can, not sure you can say anything much better than that sort of thing. I mean, and just on the promotion, I mean, looking at it from me being, I was Sunderland past. We've been in a position quite a few times in my lifetime when we've been promoted. And don't get us wrong, you always celebrate it. It's a fantastic thing. You're never going to turn it down. But for Sunderland, there's been times where there's a nagging feeling that you're not ready or you're not in a position to kind of compete, which has been the case on a few occasions when we've gone up to the Premier League. I mean, did it have that feeling when Wycombe gained promotion to the Championship, or was it just this is a free hit, this is brilliant, let's just go for it regardless?
It was an absolute free hit, because the money that we knew that was going to come was important before COVID. It was absolutely vital because of the pandemic to keep the club alive. And also everybody knew, we were playing teams that were spending, I remember we played Watford. We got our first point of the season against Watford in the 8th game of the season. We drew 1-1. We should have won. Akin Fenwell had an amazing chance. There was a goal disallowed, which on replay looked harsh. And Ismaili Sarr cost I think 25 million. You look around the team and the millions are spent. I remember going down to Bournemouth and I got stuck in traffic on the way down. So I sat there and I looked at the reported fees of the Bournemouth starting 11. It was £97 million. I mean, incredible. I mean, Wycombe haven't spent £97 million in the entire history of the club. And here we are on in the same division. And absolutely everybody said that Wycombe wouldn't get into double figures. They'd get their asses handed to them on a plate every single week. And to be honest with you, the first couple of months, it looked like they might be right. And again, Gareth Ainsworth did his thing. He said, it's going to take me a couple of months to get my head around this level. But trust us, we'll do it. And do you know what? They did. And to get to the last game of the season and still not be mathematically relegated was absolutely incredible. Bearing in mind they spent approximately, possibly just under £100,000 in transfer fees for a Championship squad. Absolutely unbelievable. And also a little bit heartbreaking, weirdly, at the end of the season, because by Christmas we thought, I think a lot of people were like, we're down. But to take it to the last day did feel a little heartbreaking.
Yeah. Well, the last 8 to 10 games, you were averaging kind of 2 points a game. And I think if the season had gone on a few weeks longer, you would have stayed up.
Yeah, absolutely. And they changed tactics and they went to 3 at the back and then put wing backs in. And they found a way to do it. And, I'm sure Gareth would have thought, if only we could have done that a month earlier. And they had a few injuries and stuff, whatever, and that may have dictated it. But you know what? It gave Wycombe fans a bit of a bounce. Pre-season around the club was incredible, because you go into, you think, as a team that's just been relegated here, it's going to be a bit of a morbid atmosphere. It was absolutely buzzing, and the fans were as well. It's just such a weird thing, because the body language about, as soon as they knew they were going to go down, it was like, right, we've got to go straight back up again. And that starts now, So yeah, I think. Yeah, it's such a weird phenomenon, because normally relegation, you think, oh God, this is going to be tricky start of the season. If we don't start well, it's going to be terrible. But they were absolutely buzzing, and the fans were as well, and everyone couldn't wait for the first game of the season. Not just because it was the first time that fans could come back, it was just because they couldn't wait to start climbing their way back to the Championship, which for a Wycombe fan is still a really weird thing to say, but there we are.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned pre-season there, and I was having a look at the business that was done during the summer by Wycombe. Quite a few free transfers, likes of Sully Kaikai from Blackpool, Oliver Pendlebury from Reading, two of the maybe kind of better known names, Sam Vokes from Stoke City, and Josh Scowen, who we released in the summer. So what is the feeling around the place in terms of the business that Gareth Ainsworth was managed to get done?
Sam Vokes was the big one because we lost Uche Ikpeazu, having sort of made his name really in the Championship because, people knew who he was, but he'd been up to Scotland, which, to be brutally frank, isn't the best level, and hadn't really kicked on, having shown real promise when he was at Cambridge. But he had half the season out and then he did really well. But and then to lose him to big money or whatever money it was, to Middlesbrough was hard. But Sam Vokes, Wycombe fans were absolutely purring when he signed. As were the Stoke fans. They couldn't believe their luck. They hated him. But he started well, and I think again, like the statistical way that Wycombe look at their signings and Gareth and Richard Dobson's assistant, they look at the stats and they were saying, look, if you get the ball into the box in the right places, then Sam Vokes has got an incredible scoring record. And so far, I know we're only a few games into the season, but it looks like they might be right. And he's getting fitter and sharper. And I think he's enjoying being at a place where the fans are pleased to see him rather than what he had at Stoke. And he looks to be thriving. And, goals breed confidence. So he's going to be absolutely raring to go on Saturday at the Stadium of Light. Josh Scowen was a no-brainer for Wycombe. Gareth Ainsworth, in his first game as caretaker manager nearly 9 years ago, the first thing he did was recall Josh from his loan spell at Eastbourne Borough in the Conference South, put him back in the team, and he's gone on to be a Championship level footballer. He's played a lot of games for QPR and in the Championship. I know you guys mixed reviews. I know it didn't quite happen for him in the North East. At Barnsley, he was absolutely loved. And at Wycombe, he's come back into Wycombe and he's been so far our man of the match in every single game. He's that good for us. But it's wonderful to see him back because he came through our youth academy when we had one. Where we had a great class. We had Jordan Ibe, we had Josh Scowen, Anthony Stewart, Matt Ingram, Kadeem Harris, players that have gone on to do really well in the game and coming out of our academy. And Josh was a linchpin of that. At the age of 28, it's great to have him back, in the peak of his career. And I know what you guys will be fearing because when players come up against their former clubs, they tend to have absolute stormers. So that may happen on Saturday. That may well happen.
Yeah, Sunderland have a particularly bad record when it comes to players having kind of stormers against us. But Josh Scowen on his day was absolutely fantastic for us last season. He just didn't have those days consistently enough, I don't think. But yeah, on his day he was cracking. And I also noticed you lost Fred Onyedinma to Luton as well. Is he a big loss?
Yeah, that was a really big loss because Fred was, a bit like what you said about Josh. On his day, unplayable. In League One, those days were more frequent. In the Championship, not so much. Luton tried to get him in January. He was a bit unsettled in the months up to Christmas and January. I think his agent was trying to get him that move. But as soon as the window closed in January and he knew he was staying, he found some fantastic form. Bizarrely at left wing back when Wycombe came into that system. And he played superbly there. And it was a real loss for him to go. I think it was a bit of a kick in the teeth for the club as well, because at Millwall he'd been frozen out and he wasn't fancied there, and he'd had a really good loan spell at Wycombe with Gaz a few years before, so it was the obvious thing for him to come to Wycombe. And Gaz really sort of developed him as a player because wonderful going forward, fantastic skills and everything else, but Gaz really instilled in him the fact that you've got to do some work as well, and he really added that defensive side to the game to make him the complete player. Luton have got a fantastic player on their hands now if they can manage him right. And yeah, it was hard for him to go because of what had been put into him by Wycombe. But I think he signed for us like 3 times already, so you never know. We might get him back yet.
Yeah, he's still only 24, I think, so there's still plenty of time on that front. But yeah, I mean, we'll talk about the start of the season, in a minute and how they've done so far. But I mean, taking the transfers we've just talked about into account, before that opening day, where was the expectation level? Because I mean, when you just look at it in terms of the progress, it's been so rapid that where are Wycombe fans in terms of thinking, where does our club sit now? Are we are we a kind of Championship stroke League One club, or are we still trying to make sure that we're a League One club? Where does expectation sit, especially before the opening day?
It's such a strange concept now because the expectation was top six. Because we finished the season in the Championship so well, because the squad was so settled, because Gaz was still here, the expectation was top six for the majority of the fans. Even though I think League One is a fantastic division this year. I mean, I think there's probably upwards of 15 teams that you could say have got a really good shout of getting promoted. But Wycombe fans have got this expectation because the Wolf is now nowhere near our door financially. We've got a bit of budget. We've got young players coming through who are exciting. We've got the best manager in the Football League. And, we haven't got to worry about the bills anymore. And, yeah, it's weird because I think Wycombe and Gaz as well, especially, have thrived on this fact that, it's little Wycombe. No one really thinks they've got any chance. They've got no money. No one expects anything. And that's what's driven them on. This is a different kettle of fish now. And I've asked Gaz about this before, like in the last few games, was saying, you've never had this concept before. You've got fans coming here on a Saturday now, expecting you to win, expecting you to be in the top six. And you can go and ring agents up now and they know that you've got money. So it's a whole new skill set for him. Even though he's been at the club for 9 years, he's experiencing new things again. But, he's proven that he learns and he does well. So I'm sure he'll do well with this challenge as well. But we expect to be in the top six. That's the brass tacks of it, really.
Well, it's definitely on target so far this season. Wins against Accrington, Cheltenham and Lincoln, and a point away to Wigan. So that's 10 points from 12 so far in the league. Has the start been as impressive in terms of the performances as it's been on paper?
No, I mean, I think encouragingly, I don't think Wycombe have got into top gear yet. They've not played. They didn't play well at Wigan. The late equaliser felt like a winner. Wigan should have beaten Wycombe hands down, to be brutally honest. Against Lincoln, it was a good tactical performance. But bearing in mind the players at their disposal now, I thought they could have, perhaps if everyone was fit and everyone was, in a bit more of a rhythm, they could have won that game more comfortably. There's a couple of players out injured. So there's a few players who are a little bit out of position. But the performances aren't quite there yet, but the results are. And that's just fueling the fire of fans thinking we're going to be in the top six. Because if you're doing that and getting results, we all know that's a really good sign. So, I think traditionally Wycombe don't start the quickest. Gaz likes to sign players late on loan. We haven't got a loanee in the squad yet and the window's still open. I'm sure stuff will happen between now and the end of the window. So the team that we've got in this first 4 games, I don't think will be the team that we see sort of in the run up to Christmas, between now and Christmas. So, things are looking good, I think, in that respect. But, I'm sure we'll get some more players through before the window closes.
Yeah, there's about a week to go, and I was going to mention that actually because you look across League One, and you look at Wycombe's transfer business, and it's the thing that strikes you straight away is that there's no loan signings. Pretty much everyone across League One is looking at the Premier League academies, and Sunderland's gone to Manchester City. We've loaned someone from West Ham, and Wycombe don't seem to have gone down that route.
Not yet, but I think they will do, and they've got an amazing record of it. I think any Premier League academy coach or reserve team manager, whatever you want to call it, will take Gareth Ainsworth's call because they develop loanees like no other club can. Ebery Chiese came to Wycombe on loan from QPR, and the rumour is that the director of football at QPR didn't even know who Eze was. Marcus Beanie was playing for Wycombe at the time. Went to see an under-23 game and saw this kid playing and thought he had a bit about him. Wycombe took him on loan. About a month in, we saw some few sub appearances, and I think it was that time they call it getting Wycombeized. I think Gaz gets into him and says, "Look, this is how you got. If you want to play for me, you've got to do the dirty work, and then from there you can go and do whatever you want to do." And then once the penny dropped with Ebbs, he was phenomenal. And now we've all seen it. I mean, he's had this heartbreaking injury at Palace, but he was on the brink of the England squad. And all the fans watching him play for Wycombe in League Two knew that was going to happen because of what Gaz had done for him. And he was released by QPR, by Millwall. Sorry, QPR picked him up. Didn't really know what they had, and it took someone like Gaz and Wycombe to say, right, here's some first team football. He's done it with Alfie Mawson. He's done it with lots of different players. Josh Knight had a fantastic season, last season on loan for Wycombe, and clubs are queuing up to sign him. I think Wycombe will get some good loanees because I think Premier League clubs will trust Wycombe to look after them and develop their players. And they'll know they'll get a better player back at the end of it. But we're developing our own players now as well, which is great because it just makes it a bit more sustainable.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what Wycombe do over the next week. But again, I mean, you talked about Gareth Ainsworth there. I mean, getting a reputation with loan players. Talked about the start he's had, everything he's done over the last kind of 9 years. Is there still a fear that if a good enough offer comes in from a championship club or maybe even higher, that he might just accept one of those offers at some point?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm astounded that no one has gone for him yet. And, I think it's the long hair and the cowboy boots, and he won't change, and he refuses to change. He says, look, this is me. This is part of who I am. He doesn't dress like Pep Guardiola. We've all seen the managers with the knitwear and the black trainers with the white sole and the skinny trousers. We've all seen it. We all know what they're doing. They're not being themselves. Gaz is himself, and that's an integral part of why he's a successful manager. And unfortunately, we talked about snobbery earlier. Possibly that's what might be holding him back a little bit. But, he's admitted that as well. He thinks that might be the case. But he's not bothered because he loves it at Wycombe and they look after him. And he remembers what happened at the start and how they stuck by him, although they didn't really have any choice. But he remembers that. And when the time comes and the opportunity comes, Wycombe fans will be, whoever that club is, they will be the second club of every Wycombe fan because they love Gaz that much. And yeah, of course we fear it. We absolutely fear it because when he goes now, he'll leave such a legacy. Whoever comes in afterwards is going to have the most difficult job in football because Gaz runs the club from top to bottom. So yeah, we fear it massively. But as long as he keeps growing his hair and wearing his weird clothes and looking like he should be in a what's that band called? Basically any of those rock bands. He looks like he's in an 80s rock video, basically. So yeah, and as long as he keeps doing that, then we might be okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we talked about. I mean, I've said a few times how long he's been there. I mean, there's only I think there's 6 managers who've been at their clubs for over 5 years. And 2 of those are Jurgen Klopp and Pep Guardiola. So I mean, has Gareth Ainsworth had to evolve over his 9 years, or has he just simply had to kind of get the best out of what he's got because, like you said, about the budgets that he's had, sometimes he's just forced to play a certain way, or does he have certain traits that you always see in a Wycombe side?
It's a bit of both, really. He's always had to kind of stretch the resources to the maximum, and the way that he plays is because, and I don't think the players would mind me saying this, in the past, is that he hasn't been able to sign sort of ball players who can really sort of tear people apart and do this on a consistent basis because he just couldn't afford it. So the system they found has worked, and that system is set pieces, getting the ball in the box as quickly as possible. And again, this when it comes back to snobbery. And everyone can argue about the right or wrong way to play football. Trust me, Wycombe fans, when they're winning every week in League One, playing that way, they didn't see anything wrong with it. The people getting beat off it did. But that's life, isn't it? That's football. But even this season, I think ahead of the game on Saturday when they beat Lincoln, going into that game, there was a great stat. In League One, 8 goals have been scored in the first 3 fixtures across the division from set pieces. 3 of those goals have been scored by Wycombe. So even though they're now playing a different system and they've got better players, they're still relying or leaning on these set pieces. I watched Lincoln play on Saturday, and the goalkeeper gets the ball in, for a goal kick. The centre backs, they split. They're on the corner of the 6-yard area. The short pass comes, the high press comes, and then the long ball comes from the centre back, and Wycombe have got possession back again. Wycombe have never, ever, ever taken a goal kick inside their own penalty. They've never passed it inside their own penalty area, ever. And, I watch it in the Premier League sometimes. I watch the England team do it sometimes, and it makes me nervous. I'm not understanding. But Wycombe have never, ever done it. And, there we are. But they're bottom of the league in terms of teams who've made 10 consecutive passes in. I don't think they've even done that yet. 10 plus passes in a move yet. I don't think they've done that. But here they are in the top 2, aren't they? Top 2, 3 already in the table. But, stats, wonderful. There's only one stat that really matters. We all know that.
Yeah. Well, that's it. And Saturday's game. We'll talk about stats. Sunderland ran out 4-0 winners last time. Wycombe made the trip up to the northeast. I thought I'd get in there. And that was January 2020. So it's been a while. Both sides sit in the top 5. Only a point separating them. So it's set up for an early chance for either side to kind of lay down a marker. Having watched Wycombe this season, what type of game are you expecting them to bring up to the Stadium of Light?
Well, because the fans are back, it's going to be a cauldron, isn't it? It's going to be great. I mean, Stadium of Light is a fantastic place to watch football when the fans are there. It's a great arena. The fans, you guys love your football up there. And when you're behind the team, it's almost impossible for the away team. I remember Wycombe getting a 1-1 draw up there the first time they ever visited. The 4-0 was richly deserved by Sunderland that day. And I think also, the fact they'd lost at Adams Park earlier that season 1-0 and some of the comments after that game certainly fired up the fans and probably fired up some of the team as well. And Wycombe were on the end of that one that day and fair and square as well. And, it was a deserved win that day. I think Saturday's going to be, Wycombe away from home against the odds. They'll dig in. Gareth will enjoy being the underdog. He'll relish that, and they'll try and make it tight. And the first goal will be absolutely massive because if Wycombe get it, if they get it in the first minute, the goal kicks will take about 3 minutes to take. They'll disrupt the rhythm of play. They'll get the fans frustrated, and they'll hope that frustration seeps onto the pitch. And they're the masters of that. And if that happens, then you guys are going to go absolutely crazy. I can see it if that's what happens. If you guys get the first goal and then Wycombe have to then come out on the front foot a bit and maybe leave some gaps, then we could be looking at another 3-4-0 for you guys. But that first goal on Saturday is going to be absolutely massive. If Wycombe get it, then yeah, there's going to be all sorts of problems.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about the mentality of the players and what Gareth Ainsworth kind of puts into them. Are Wycombe in a place that's, the mentality of the players where they feel they can just take anyone on, whether it's home or away, or do they have to adjust accordingly?
They think they can beat anybody at any game. That's always their mentality. They go into, they played Tottenham in the FA Cup last season. They were going into that game thinking they were going to win it. And it wasn't just sort of, lip service. They generally believe that. Like the other season when the PPG came in, Gareth was saying, we're gutted. We thought we were going to get promoted. We had a real chance of getting up automatically. That's how they think, and it's true. That's what they believe from the kit man up. And they'll go into Saturday knowing that they can get the 3 points. And they'll attack the game, until they can't attack it anymore, until it's beyond their reach. But that's what their belief will be going into it. And as fans, obviously we don't think like that because fans, we're cynical and negative. But certainly the playing staff and everyone involved with the club professionally will be saying, yeah, we're going into this game for the 3 points.
Yeah. It sounds like you've spoken to quite a few Sunderland fans talking about that kind of having that outlook. But you mentioned Sam Vokes being in form. He's got a couple of goals already this season. Is he kind of the danger man for Sunderland on Saturday?
Yeah, absolutely. And the way to stop Sam Vokes will quite simply to stop the service to him out wide. And, Joe Jacobson, although he's playing centre-back largely at the moment, he's taking all of our set pieces. He's still getting forwards in a Chris Wilder, rampaging centre-back style. And if the ball's into the box of there, then statistically that's why Wycombe signed him. He'll look to get on the end of one and probably will. So I'm sure that Sunderland are working hard already to try and stop the ball coming into him. But yeah, he's starting to purr now and he's looking confident. He needed an arm round him after Stoke, and that's what Wycombe have given him, and it looks to be working for him and the club.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned Wycombe aren't going to play it out from the back. That's one thing they're definitely not going to do. But if you're in Lee Johnson's shoes, what's kind of the best way to get at this Wycombe side?
Press them high. They've got to roll their sleeves up. Sunderland will want to play they want to get the ball down and play, but before they can do that, they've got to earn the right to do it, which means that they've got to go toe to toe for a physical battle. Once they can match them there, if you do that, then get the ball down and play, and that's how to beat Wycombe. You can't turn up and just think, right, yeah, we're just going to stroke the ball around and have it our own way, because that doesn't tend to happen against Wycombe. You've got to get stuck in, and you can't get sucked into the frustration game, because if you do that, then you're chasing your tail. But Lee Johnson will know that. He knows Gaz well. He'll know how Wycombe have done, and I'll expect him to be working hard on that. And he's got Luke O'Nien, to tell him, because Luke was one of Gareth's disciples. Luke did everything that Gareth asked of him to the letter, and he knows how that dressing room works, and he knows how Wycombe works. So you've got a spy in the camp. As much as we love him, you've got a spy in the camp.
Yeah, well, he's going to be struggling. I think he did his shoulder again last week, so I'm not sure whether he's going to make the game. Pretty doubtful, I think, but we'll see. I'm sure he'll give it to the last minute, non Luke O'Nien. But yeah, I mean, I assume that you're travelling up for the game.
Sadly not. Family circumstances, unfortunately, at the moment. I won't be there on Saturday, but I'll be following, and I'll be kicking and heading every ball with them, and because I'm not commentating, I can be a proper fan, so I'll be shouting and swearing at the TV screen, or actually I'm in the UK, I'll just be listening. I won't be on iFollow, honest.
Yeah. Well, I'll not ask you for a prediction on the game, but I'll ask you to answer this one with your head maybe rather than the heart. Do you think Wycombe will bounce straight back up?
Yeah, head and heart say yes.
All right.
Because unless we're doing so well that someone comes in and takes Gaz away from us, I think we'll be up there. I really do. Normally I allow my head to answer this and say, mid-table, whatever. But yeah, there's such a buzz and such a great atmosphere around Wycombe. I think they're going to be top six, and even if it's the playoffs and it's not automatic promotion, I wouldn't bet against them in that situation.
Interesting, good stuff. Well, I'll look out for that at the end of the season. Let's hope Saturday's game is as good as the billing, with both sides in good form. But on that note, I just want to say thank you very much, Phil. Really enjoyed the chance to catch up, and all the best for the season ahead. Great
stuff. Always a pleasure. I love you guys up there, ROKER Report, and you fans and everything. It's a great club, and in all seriousness, if Wycombe would go up, I hope you guys come up too, because you're a massive club and you should be in the Championship, really. And fingers crossed you get there. Yeah, you never know. One of these days soon, I'd hope it's this year, but yeah, I think everyone's being cautiously optimistic up here, but we'll see. But thanks again, Phil. Really appreciate it. My pleasure. And thanks again for everyone listening. Keep a lookout at ROKER Report for all the build-up ahead of the game against Wycombe at the weekend. And keep an eye out on all the usual places for the next podcast or podcast that should be dropping soon. But from us, it's bye for now.